So as you know, for the last 3 weeks, this is week 4, I've been using Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, as my inspiration for these messages. She has just such a beautiful wealth of storytelling and scientific knowledge all interwoven together in a way that's just pure poetry. And I don't know that I've done it justice, but at least you've gotten a taste. And I know it's raised my awareness in many different ways of how I respond to creation, how I interact with life, how I think of beings in this world. There are many stories I did not share out of here, so feel free to still go buy the book and enjoy it, because there's so much here I could read it again and again. So today, this is her wisdom. After all these generations since Columbus, some of the wisest of native elders still puzzle over the people who came to our shores. They look at the toll on the land and say, the problem with these new people is that they don't have both feet on the shore. One is still on the boat. They don't seem to know whether they're staying or not. The same observation is heard from some contemporary scholars who see in the social pathologies and relentlessly materialistic culture the fruit of homelessness, a rootless past. America has been called the home of second chances for the sake of the peoples and the land. The urgent work of the second man, that's all of us, may be to set aside the ways of the colonist and become indigenous to place. But can Americans, as a nation of immigrants, learn to live here as if we were staying, with both feet on the shore?
The reading today comes from Nan Merrill's book called Psalms for Praying. May we have faith in the unfolding of our lives and radical trust in the universe. Awaken us to the oneness of all things, to the beauty and truth of unity. May we become aware of the interdependence of all living things and come to know you in everything and all things in you. For as we attune to your presence within us, we know not separation, and joy becomes our dwelling place. Quiet us, O silent speaker, that out of still spaces we may hear your word. And as we ponder the immensity of your gifts to us of life, awe and wonder fill our hearts, far from the galaxies and the furthest stars, to the smallest atom in our heart. You are the flame of love. Forgive us, O Holy One, for our wanton ways that have laid waste to our planet. May we embrace creation as a whole and become attuned to all the world. May we be blessing to the universe and see divinity in the within and the without of all things.
Would you pray with me? Ground for being. May we feel that connection with all things this morning. The oneness, the awe, the connectedness, the truth of it all. That we are not individuals, but we are part of a whole. May the words of my mouth, the meditations of each of our hearts, be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. The words of Nan Merrill really spoke to me when I read them. It's nothing new, it's nothing we haven't heard, but it's a beautiful poetic reminder once again that we are interconnected, that there's truth and beauty in unity. And it laments again it says the wanton ways of humanity and the destruction we've done to the earth. And it calls us to be blessings, to the world, to the universe. Not just another person, but to every being, as we've learned, every tree and every bird and every grass and every rock, every mountain, every insect. To regard them all as beings, not as things to be used and objects to be looked at, but as part of us, part of what sustains us. I can't say that modern rendition of Psalm 106 is, in my opinion, a terribly accurate interpretation. But in all honesty, it holds such deep spiritual, life-affirming truth in it that for me it is sacred writing. I don't think sacred writing has to only come from our Bible or from some other religion's traditional scripture. Perhaps it's an evolution of our spiritual thought. But there is deep-seated truth in her words. And so I hold it up as something sacred. And perhaps if we had more spiritual writing like that in our own scriptures, maybe all of these years we would have treated our planet and all of the beings on it differently. And maybe we wouldn't be in this position we're in right now where so much has been destroyed. And climate change is threatening us. Perhaps we wouldn't have the native elders looking at us and saying, you know, those folks, they still have 1 foot on the land and 1 foot in the boat, and they don't know if they're coming or going. That whole concept really struck me. To think about, are we living as if we're really staying here for good, forever? Or are we living as if it doesn't really matter? Robin Wall Kimmerer says, we can be perhaps one of two things. We can be an invasive species, or we can be a species that learns to live in harmony with all of the plants and animals and everything that is around us. And the choice becomes ours, as we said in the children's time. It's our choice as to whether we're going to stand on the side of life. So, just to flesh out that metaphor a little bit, name some indigenous, I'm not sure I can let you play, Melissa, but for the rest of you, name some indigenous plants, not invasive plants. Buckthorn. Yeah, we know that Dick has a going battle, I don't know, with the buckthorn. What else? Garlic mustard.
Burning bush.
Burning bush. Is that true? A burning bush?
Yeah.
Creeping Charlie? Poison ivy. Is poison ivy an invasive? No, not an invasive species. Chase? Dandelions, Melissa? Okay, my wife would consider that an invasive species, but I don't know that it really is. The bees like them. The Star of Bethlehem. How about all those burr things we were pulling last time we got together that got me in the eye. Chase?
Pricker weeds.
What kind of?
Pricker weeds.
Pricker weeds? And those are invasive species? They will be if they get out of the yard. Oh, okay. Carol said all the plants that we put in our yard are invasive species. And I said, oh, she said, well, if they get out of your yard, they are. So, does everybody know what all of those plants look like that everybody said? I know some of them, but I can't say I know all of them. Because they kind of blend in, and after a while you don't know which is supposed to be there and which isn't supposed to be there. Right? I think it's so, we don't have this here, but when I think of an invasive species, I think kudzu. Who doesn't know what kudzu is? A bunch of you. Okay. So kudzu is also known as the vine that ate the South. Because if you go south, if you go down to like the Appalachia area and you go to some other areas, you will just see acres and acres of trees and things covered with this green blankety vine. It comes out into the roads. They say it like grows a foot at night. And it literally destroys everything that it covers. And that's what's in my head when I think invasive species. It's all of those other things too, but those don't look quite as menacing as this green blanket just slowly eating everything up. Well, so Robin Wall Kimmerer says, we do not want to be kudzu. Okay? If we have a choice to be an invasive species or a species that plays nice with everybody else, we don't want to be kudzu. We don't get to be indigenous. My guess is that all of us here, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but all of us here came from immigrants at some point or another. So frankly, that makes us all invasive species. But we can unlearn perhaps our kudzu-ness and try and learn to stay in place, maybe. To be good to those things around us. You know, and unfortunately, I don't think our religion or our society has helped us to be any less kudzu. Our traditional religion for so many, many years, maybe, I'm hoping a little bit less now, but was focused on the afterlife. It was all about what you gotta do to get to heaven. And so it really didn't matter a whole lot what happened here because this was not the end goal anyways. So you could do, whatever you wanted to the earth because we weren't living here forever anyways. It's the same concept of 1 foot here and 1 foot on the boat. And then our materialistic market economy that we talked a bit about last week certainly does not have values that are conducive to being indigenous to place, as Robin Wall Kimmerer asks us to do, to be naturalized, to be indigenous to place, to care about this place. But what does it take for us not to be kudzu, but for us to remember, for us to have both our feet firmly planted on this soil that we really consider home? I mean, you all consider this place home, right? Even though you came from immigrant families somewhere along the line. This is home. This is where we raise our children. This is where we work and we toil. This is where we bury our loved ones. What does it take for us to let go of our invasiveness, where we just take whatever we need and whatever we want and learn to be indigenous to place? Yeah, that song called us out on our wanton ways. I mean, can we name some of the ways that humanity in general, has just done what it wanted with the earth and things that have happened? Strip mining, even worse than that, mountaintop blowing off mining. What did you say? Fracking. What else?
Cutting down rainforests to house cows.
Cutting down rainforests. Clear cutting anywhere.
Companies that split their waste into our waters.
Companies that let their waste go into the waters.
Making golf courses in deserts.
Making golf courses in deserts. Taking all that water to feed the golf course. What else?
Lawns.
I'm sorry?
Lawns.
Smog, yes. Air pollution.
Lawns.
Oh, lawns. Sorry, we were things different up here. Well, we can get both of them. Our lawns and all of the things we do to cause air pollution.
All the garbage dumped in our oceans.
All the garbage dumped in the oceans. The plastics.
The lie of recycling.
The lie of recycling, that perhaps it doesn't all go where it says it's going to go. Dependence on oil. Instead of renewable resources. We don't do the sustainable living that we're really called to do. We don't live simply. So there's all kinds of pieces. So Robin Wall Kimmerer tells a story about the first human. And his name was Nanaboso. He was the first person created by the Creator. And it's said that he was half man and half spirit being. And that Creator gathered up the four elements and created Nanaboso and then breathed life into him and placed him on Sky Woman's earth with all of the creatures. But interestingly enough, while he was the first person to live on Turtle Island, he was the last being to live on Turtle Island. So everything was already created and in balance and in harmony. All the plants and the animals lived in harmony. And he got to Earth, and his one directive was to walk on the land that Sky Woman created, as if each step were a greeting to Mother Earth. As if each step were a greeting to Mother Earth. And he wasn't quite sure how to do that. And so the animals helped him to learn how to do that. And the first thing they taught him was that, well, if you're going to greet things with each step, you should know their names. I mean, how many of us know the names of all of the plants and all of the birds and all of the trees that are in our yards and in our neighborhoods or in the places that we walk? So to greet them, we need to know their names. To be people with feet firmly planted, we need to know the names of those that we're planted with. And then the animals taught him things. Heron taught him how to pick wild rice, and beaver taught him how to make an axe. And raccoon taught him how to wash his food. And the whale gave him the idea of a shape for a canoe. And grandmother spider, her web showed him how to make a net. And then he was at a council with all of the animals, and the animals gave him another directive. And they said, you must not damage creation or interfere with the sacred purpose of any being. You must not damage creation or interfere with the sacred purpose of another being. And we've listed all of the ways that we've damaged creation. Can you think of a way that we've interfered, aside from all of those, which probably have done it, interfered with the sacred purpose of some of our creatures?
Zoos.
The zoos.
Or circus.
Or the circus.
Roads.
Roads.
Industrial buildings.
Industrial buildings. Urban sprawl. Light pollution that messes up the migratory patterns of beings. I think about the salmon, Nancy, right? The dams and things that they built that messed up the salmon and their breeding grounds. There are all kinds of things that have, we don't even think of them as sacred beings, and so we don't think about messing up their purpose in life. Think about the mountains that are clear-cut and now there are mudslides, or the resorts that go up on the beachfront and take away all of the plants that are holding the beach together. We go on and on and on. So she talks about how they're, even aside from doing all of the little things that I'm sure we're all doing to care for our environment, that an attitude of standing for life, but also a recognition that that we need to be about reciprocity and restoration. Reciprocity and restoration. I've never, I don't think, personally thought about the fact that maybe the earth and some of her creatures need us as much as we need them. And she offers a number of examples, but one of them is sweetgrass. The fact is that sweetgrass was abundant when natives were harvesting it for baskets and for smudge sticks for their ceremonies. But then when their traditions were not allowed anymore, the sweetgrass started to disappear. And other plants took over the fields. And the grandmothers had always told the basket weavers to ask permission to harvest the sweetgrass, to leave a gift, and then to only take what's needed, and at most, take only half. But they also said, if you ignore the plants, they will go away. And interestingly enough, science has confirmed exactly what the grandmothers said. that there was a relationship of reciprocity between the humans who pick the grasses and the fact that it flourishes when it's picked. And so while Robin Wall Kimmerer and her students have planted fields of sweetgrass now, they will only flourish if the basket makers come back. And if they care for and respect for that land and use the sweetgrass. I think that's fascinating. And then there's the concept of restoration. If we're going to be people with feet firmly planted, restoration has to be part of what we do. Yes, there are organizations out there that are working to restore the rainforests and the oceans and everything else, but we can do so as well. There's a story about a man named Franz Dolp. And about 35 years ago, Franz lost his wife, and he lost his dreams. And he decided he got divorced, I should be clear about that. She didn't die. He decided he needed a new dream. And his new dream was that he wanted to live on an Oregon homestead, embedded in the trees, like his grandfather had done. And so he bought 40 acres in the Oregon mountains, not far from where his grandfather had homesteaded. But what he bought was not pristine wilderness. It had been clear-cut multiple times. The old growth, huge cedars had been clear-cut, and then their children had been clear-cut, and then the firs that grew up after them had been clear-cut. And so he came to a land that he realized he couldn't just make right by building a cabin and planting a couple of trees. Not only did he need healing, but the land needed healing. The only remnant of the old growth forest that was left on his land was a huge log. You know, cedar doesn't break down terribly well, but a huge cedar log. And he saw that log walk in his land, and he vowed to make his land an old growth forest. But he wasn't going to do it throwing herbicides on everything, because that would mean that the land would be poisoned and all that would grow would be fir trees. He wanted all of the species to be represented. And so he set about clear-cutting that land by hand himself. Now, when land is clear-cut, the stuff that grows next are all the thorny berry bushes. They just spread. So his land was covered with thorny berry bushes. If you've ever cleared those, you know how unfun that is. And yet that was his goal, was to take them out and to start planting cedar and hemlock and the trees that had been there naturally, who had been indigenous to place. It didn't always go well. He thought planting cedars by the stream would be a really great idea. They'd get lots of water. Well, who knew that beavers ate cedar for dessert? So he planted the cedar again, and he put a big fence around it, and he planted some willow groves, because apparently that's beaver's favorite food. A couple years in, he finally met a woman named Dawn, who shared his dream and his vision, and between the two of them, over the course of 10 years, they planted 13,000 trees. And they created a whole bunch of pathways going through. And he did all of that not knowing how to do any of it, not knowing anything about any of it. And so he observed, he'd go to the old growth forests and he'd observe, or he'd read and he'd study. And so he studied and he planted and he marked and he measured and he created groves that he named. And eventually he got to a place where the watershed started to reflect the healing that was happening. And he could begin to believe that in 150 years in the future, his old growth cedars would once again capture the landscape. And then he created in his little cabin something called the Spring Creek Project. See, he was a writer at heart. He wasn't a forester. But he created a place where people could come to collaborate, artists and scientists and philosophers where they could collaborate together to learn about the natural world and to be able to express the beauty and the wonder and the importance of the natural world to others. Unfortunately, in 2004, Franz Stolp was killed in a collision with, of all things, a paper mill truck. A paper mill truck. Going back home to his property. But before he had died, he journaled everything he did. And before he died, he had written in there that he felt like he could rest in peace. Because he knew that the land that he had created, the old growth forest he had created, would continue to grow and that people could continue to walk those paths. And the center that he'd created would continue to draw people to collaborate on the importance of the natural world. So I put that out there because one person, two people can make a difference. And maybe we're not all going to go buy 40 acres and restore an old growth forest. But maybe we can plant a tree. And maybe we can go help get rid of the burdock or the garlic mustard. Or maybe we can, change our habits and bike a little bit more and drive a little bit less. Whatever it is, it's about feet firmly planted. Both of them, here. This is our land. This is our home. This is our future for our children and our children's children. And it deserves every ounce of care and respect and love that we have. Amen.